I'm Luigi one of Ontario Out of Doors Magazine's columnists. I'm going to teach you the simple way of making your own trout floats. After you cut your piece of balsa wood or selected your cork, you got to drill a hole right through the middle with a small drill bit. Now thread it on a metal rod that's going to be used on your lathe. I cut the handle off a metal shish kebab stick and it worked great. Now thread one end of the rod on the chuck of your lathe, or drill in this case. It's best to secure the other end of the rod with a piece of wood. This way, when it's running at high speed, it will keep it balanced and running true. Start up the motor and select a coarse grade of sandpaper, this one's a 60 grit, to help shape and mold your piece of wood. Initially, I'll just use a piece of sandpaper to help form and shape the piece of wood. Later on, once I get the shape, I'll wrap the sandpaper around a piece of wood, and this really helps create consistent angles and design. The good thing about balsa, it's easy to work with. You have to be careful because if you apply too much pressure, you can warp it or actually spin it on the rod. As you see here, we're starting to get a general shape. I want to keep this one a little bit elongated. I stick to the coarse grade sandpaper for much of the design. It helps speed up the process. And then I'll switch to a fine grained sandpaper for the finishing touches. Here I'm using cork to make a float. The process is the exact same. In the beginning, I'll stay with the coarse sandpaper. In the finishing touches, I'll move to a 180 grit and then finally a 220 to keep it silky smooth. The only downfall of the cork is that you're limited on its size and the thickness of the float. A couple seconds with 220 grit and you'll really smooth it out nicely. With the dowel in the float, I take some sandpaper and smooth out any burrs or rough edges. Once that's done, I'll get a pair of wire snippers and cut off any excess dowel. Depending on how large you make your float, you'll have a few choices of what kind of toothpick, barbecue skewer, or dowel you'll need. Next, the float takes a bath in polyurethane. This helps seals it, and the paint applies a little bit easier. I'll hang my floats upside down on a piece of styrofoam to allow any of the excess polyurethane to drip. Run a piece of paper underneath it to catch any blobs or drips. I prefer to put my float in white paint first. This acts as a primer, and it keeps the red color lasting longer. Again, hang them upside down so they'll drip dry, and run a piece of paper to knock off any drips. Now it's time to apply the red acrylic paint. After the red paint is dried, the final stage is dipping it back into the urethane. This seals the entire float, makes it more waterproof and durable for fishing.